Because this is primarily a course upon mediumship and what that entails, we thought that it would be helpful to you to understand our side of perhaps your activities, since whilst you are fully aware of your own problems and difficulties and confusions, you're not necessarily aware of the part we play in the cooperation and unity that this affords to enable the purpose of mediumship, which of course is communication, to take place in an effective and efficient manner. You have learned, of course, that you have a psychic mechanism. You have learned that by the exercising of this mechanism in a knowledgeable and efficient way, you enable your auric field to expand and your vibrations, your overall vibrations, to become increased, whereby you can be receptive to thought and sound beyond your normal physical limitation. And it is our part now that responds to that expansion that we wish to try and elaborate for you. Your guides are people who work wholly and completely on your mediumistic instrumentality. I'm sorry,
can you just protect yourself? Somebody seems to have risen out of their seat. I beg your pardon. I apologize for that. She must have come to the wrong room.
So what happens in those circumstances, dear ones, is that the threads that join me to you, that is, join the solar plexus of my instrument to you, are broken. And if that happens suddenly, without the preparation our friends so kindly afforded me, then it whips back like elastic, and it can be extremely distressing. It's not nearly so severe in the very beginning, because the hole is not nearly so extensive as it subsequently becomes. But thank you very much for the preparation there. All right. Now, as I've explained, your guides are concerned only with you as an instrument. And when we talk about your instrumentality, we are including healing, we are including any type of service to mankind that incorporates the additional assistance of a higher level of consciousness, namely those spirit communicators. Even your healing power is enhanced by the application and presence of your guide's power that is incorporated in your own healing power and gives it added momentum. But all of these things demand a certain group of persons who have elected to walk with you, rather like your colleagues in your business, where perhaps you are in a group of activity and one contributes this, one contributes that, and you are all, as it were, joined together in your common purpose. Now, this is what your guides are, of course, able to do on behalf of your mediumship. Again, to clarify something that I may be somewhat repetitive over, these guides have nothing to do with your personal life as such, only inasmuch as your personal life in any way interferes or obstructs their particular purpose or activity. To help you on a purely spiritual level of communication, in a personal sense, that is, you have what we call guardians. And while everybody has guardians, they are as inescapable and as continuous as your ancestry, as your family. And these are your spiritual family, and however many incarnations you have, your family, your spiritual family, remains with you to a greater and higher degree of progress and what that means. That is an entirely different subject, so that it merely is for point of clarification that I want to mention it. Guides, then, are solely concerned with your ability, your contribution as a medium. And all these levels of mediumship incorporate your guide's cooperation and presence. Now, let's talk about these things one by one. I'm going to, of course, give you plenty of opportunity to question me about any particular aspect of this, and I would especially welcome anything that puzzles you in a purely personal way, because, of course, everything is individual in mediumship, and perhaps my answer to one person may not necessarily be an explanation for you. So don't hesitate when the time comes to make your questions personal, as long as they are solely concerned with mediumship and what it means. Mediumship itself, then, is a kind of bridge. It is a place of communication or being reunited from the spirit world into the almost astral level of consciousness. It is a kind of halfway house between the earth and the spirit world. Your friends, first of all, from the spirit world, have to learn how to, what we call, slow down their vibrations before they can enter into this astral plane of communication. In regards to communication, you can only communicate on the astral level, because the astral level contains the replica of the person whom you were on the earthly plane, your past identity, as it were, or your most recent identity on the earthly plane. And so that it necessitates a readoption, if you are on our side of life, a readoption of the person whom you were in this incarnation. In the spirit world, you are separated a great deal from your physical personality, your body as such. Again, according to your degree of development and understanding, you cast off, just as the caterpillar, as it were, the butterfly rather, casts off the caterpillar skin and becomes the butterfly. So you, as a spirit, can cast off this earthly body and all that that means to you in terms, again, of earthly recognition. But if you want to come back and tell your daughters, your husbands, your brothers, your sisters, if you want to come back and convince them that you are by no means non-existent, that you are most certainly continuing in another plane of consciousness that has quite easy access to you on a spiritual level, but demands a completely different procedure on a mediumistic level or communicating level, then you would wish to adopt or readopt your familiar form, that personality, the appearance, and all the characteristics that were part of your identity when you were here in the body. Now that necessitates, rather like throwing one of your pictures onto your television screen. It's a reality in that it is an accurate representation of you, but it's not the real you, in that your spirit, as it were, is projecting that as a kind of memory or readoption. I don't want to confuse you with these, these separations of explanation, but it is important that you understand that when your mother or father, your dear ones, come back and say, I had terrible pain before I passed, or the medium may say to you, this lady suffered terrible pain, I'm feeling a most dreadful pain in my stomach or my heart or whatever. Sometimes I find people get confused in that they think that their dear ones are still suffering in this way, and I can assure you they are not. It is this readoption. Now, to attain this readoption, we have no memory the way you have memory. For us, everything is now. So that when your dear one comes back and says, I remember being in the hospital and I remember you holding my hand, they are reliving that experience. They are actually reliving it, because that is the only way we can manifest from our side of life. It's important that you understand that, because that is the kind of illusionary experience on behalf of your dear one, illusionary in that it has no spiritual reality, but it is a reality from the angle of your need to recognize something with which you identify that person and you wouldn't know them necessarily in their true spiritual identity, because of course it has no physical parallel as such. Now these are the areas, again, which give rise to confusion, because they necessitate, on the medium's part, this cultivation of feeling and sight and sound that is graded in their own receptivity. The heaviest of these are, of course, the emotional contacts, in which we have, first of all, the pain and the stress, perhaps, or we may have the overwhelming love that your dear one feels for you. Your instrument here will say, this person was very close to you. They loved you very much, because the whole aspect of the emotional centers is filled with the affection, the regard, which they hold you in. And then they would perhaps begin to see them or to hear them. And then that would be followed by specific information that would again identify them specifically in your eyes. From our side, however, it is important because, as I've explained, whilst they can and they do readopt this physical consciousness, this physical recollection of themselves, that has to be maintained by the guides with what we call auric replenishment. And as the flow, the conscious flow of the thought waves begin to fade, or anything from your side that interrupts that flow, remember it's a coordinated thing. The medium is connected to the communicating spirit by the auric energies. The guide is behind that, injecting a kind of extra auric energy to maintain the level as far as possible. And then the recipient is receiving aurically the contact that this communicator is making into their auric field. You can't have this kind of communication without the recipient being aurically attached to the medium, and of course the medium to the communicator to the guide. So you will see that it is quite a complicated process of preparation to maintain this compatible area of auric harmony. Any interruption, your sudden question, for instance, can throw your communicator simply because they have, in their readoption of themselves, identified themselves with a certain pattern of procedure that includes this and includes that, but doesn't necessarily include the area of your question. And it isn't that they don't remember that they had a brother Bob, or they don't remember that they used to live here or they used to live there. It's simply that they are geared to a certain area of communication which is identified with their recollection that is most suited to what they consider to be your need of their proof of their continued existence. So that these then areas of communication and attachment are extremely sensitive. They're broken very, very easily. But if you understand that it is a possibility, if you understand how the communication is taking place, obviously, even though you can't avoid the breaking down for one reason or another, you can very easily repair it from your side. I'm speaking now, of course, from the medium's point of view, not the recipient. You see, the recipient is excused in that they have usually no prior knowledge of what is being undertaken here. They have only their own need. They have only their own desire. They want only that is fitting for their particular purpose. And they have no awareness at all of the various complications and the delicacy of the operation. The medium, however, properly trained, understanding the mechanism, understanding their partnership with their guides and communicators, can be very much more cooperative and very much more effective by that understanding, if they will immediately recognize in their own particular sensitivity that certain things have broken down. For instance, in that very brief occasion where our friend went out, it broke down my auric connection temporarily. Now, all I had to do was to wait a few moments and then re-establish that auric connection. If, however, my medium was normal and that broke down that connection, then unless she was aware that it had indeed broken down and it needed re-establishing, it needed repair, she could get very bothered and very anxious about it. And I'm sure you've seen demonstrations where such things have occurred. So the important thing is to recognize that yes, it is a delicate procedure, that it is extremely, again, dependent upon the medium and guide and recipient, and communicators' cooperation. At the same time, a clear understanding of the way it operates minimizes tremendously the inevitable interruptions and confusions that arise from such communication. Now, mediums again vary in their degree of usefulness. I'm sorry, I didn't quite know whether that was a kind word to use. But yes, it is a degree of usefulness. Because just as you have many services in the physical sense, you have your dentists, you have your doctors, you have your opticians, you have your surgeons, you have all these areas of usefulness in service that would in no way feel competitive in any sense of the word, but would accept their variety, as it were, of contribution. And so it is with mediumship. Mediums have what we call a range. It's rather like, I think the nearest example I can give you is the range of a singer. Now, a singer can have 2 to 5 octaves, or they can have much less or much more. They can, however, in that range, they can confine themselves to, let us say, the lower register rather than the higher, or the middle, and so on. So, but they have a range. And a medium then has what we call a psychic range. Now, a range is the ability to increase your vibration to a certain level. And once you've reached that level in spiritual terms, you have access to all communicating spirits within that range. We are not inhibited in any way by lack of approaching with one another. We are limited only by what we call the vibratory range. I can, just as you can in your sleep state, liberated from your spirit, from your body, your spirit can make contact in the spirit world far, far in excess to anything that your conscious mind can absorb. But that too is limited by the range, your spiritual range, or your note of progression. But that, if you compare it with your physical consciousness, is far in advance of what you could reach on a physical level. By the same token, in the spirit world, when you come here, you will reach a certain level of progression that will give you a range that can take you beyond, to a degree, beyond that point of progression, just as your entry into spirit from your sleep state is beyond your physical range, so you can, in your spiritual state, reach beyond that. But that is, again, limited to the degree of that range of your development. And if you could, you can't, but if you could go beyond that range, it would disintegrate. You have no contact with it at all. Now, if you can analogize that with the mediumship range of communication, you have a psychic level. Now, the propagandist, the medium who wants to give clear evidence of survival, is essentially bound to what we call the astral level, because only that kind of evidence is acceptable on the level of the inquirer. It's no use telling some very bereaved mother or widow that their child or their husband has gone way, way beyond the range of their recollection, and they are now a beautiful spirit and they are functioning in a beautiful light, it would mean nothing to them. But if the little girl or the little boy dances happily in and says, here I am, and talks about the toys, talks about the things they remember in the world that they just left behind, or your husband reminds you of some precious, intimate moment of physical intimacy, then quite definitely you know, since you've never seen the medium before in your life, you know that it must be coming from your loved one. Now that necessitates what we call the astral level of density, and of necessity it limits the range of the medium to that level. It doesn't mean that they are not spiritually minded. Everything you do with sincerity, with a sincere desire to bring comfort and alleviation to mankind, is spiritualized. It is the motive, it is the quality that you bring in to everything that you do that causes it to be spiritual. But they are, of necessity, limited on that astral level. On that astral level, as I've already explained, they have to readopt the person whom they were on the earth plane. And in readopting their personality, they deny themselves access to the spiritual range of experience to which now, of course, they have access when they are liberated from this astral level. So they then have to explain themselves on the physical level that you will remember, but they are powerless to move beyond that range, because to do so would be to separate them from the area of evidence. So you have then certain mediums who have this quality of what I'm going to call density, astral density, that specializes in a faithful relaying of identity and evidential facts of identity that are an essential introduction to the reality of the continuity of life and, of course, your own spiritual identity. That is one aspect. You have then, all right, you've convinced the person on the earth plane. You've told them that you are still alive if you are our side, and that you are the person whom you say you are. They are completely convinced. They have accepted your continuity of life. They have accepted that this same continuity affords you a freedom of access to them that is not dependent upon a mediumistic message. They are now able to liberate themselves from what they call astral identity, and they are able now to communicate with you through what we call a mental register of faster frequency. They could talk now about their efforts to help you to understand this person or that person in your family. They are dealing with your present situation. They don't talk about the pain or their operation or their this or their that. They come in and they say, we were there with you when you were trying to help so-and-so, and all that means. Now that is not necessary, it is still astral to the degree, of course, that it concerns physical activity, but it's not astral in that they have to necessarily readopt their own physical identity at that particular point. They can move now onto a spiritual level of mental association, mental contact with you that is a finer vibration. And here is the medium who doesn't always get names and details and conditions of passings, but is able to say accurately exactly why they were with you. And so, I saw you, they will say, picking the roses, or I saw you changing over the photographs, or whatever. Now this is not an astral thing. It's a mental and spiritual contact which bypasses the density of the astral, but is a spirit-to-spirit contact with you. And when they talk about seeing you, they don't see you on a physical level. They see what I call your mental register of what you are doing and why you are doing it. which is why it must puzzle you sometimes when they say, I saw you do this or I saw you do that. And perhaps you've had a very bad fall, and they don't mention that at all, because that would be probably a purely astral thing from which they would be separate. They would get the distress of your fall, and they would get the thought of your fall, but afterwards, they would say too that they were aware of your need for extra help, because that would come on a much faster frequency. So you get then a degree or range of mediumship that should move you, the recipient now, move you step by step from the reality of identity to the continuity of love and protective service, and perhaps from there to your own spiritual need to recognize your own personal responsibility in any field of activity that life presents to you. That is the recipient's then progress or point of progression. The medium, however, has to accept that they have no idea of their range when they are developing their psychic attributes. They may start on this dense and rather physical level. It may start, of course, by having uninvited experiences, like hearing voices, hearing knocks, and seeing people that they don't recognize, they have no idea who they are, and so on. It can start in all sorts of ways, but that does not necessarily follow that you are that kind of medium. So that from our angle, if we could dismiss from your minds that you want to do this, or you want to do that, or you want to do the other, it would help us enormously in that as guides, as helpers, we are fully cognizant of your ability, the quality, your potential, your range. You may start on this elementary level in the circumstances because you too, your mind, has to be convinced of your own reality of mediumship. It's no use somebody telling you, look, you're a medium, you can see the spirit people and you can hear the spirit people if you do something about it, unless your mind accepts that. Now, usually you don't believe it, because very often it comes in the very beginning. But of course, it's quite clear in the auric field that you have this psychic potential. Any psychic power is easily discernible in an auric field, and any sensitive can very quickly detect psychic potential. But that of itself is not necessarily enough for you as an experience, so that you may require a certain physical now representation of it, in that, for reasons I've already stated, you've heard something, you've seen something that you know was not physical. It was a definite psychic experience. Now that, again, is indicative of your potential. But if from there, and remember we have to wait for you to say to us, we are willing to do this for God and for the spirit people. We are willing to use our psychic power either for healing, for comforting the bereaved, or whatever. We want to be of service. We don't mind what we do as long as we are of service. Now we have to wait for that. We know, of course, we've been waiting for you to awaken to this realization, of your potential and, of course, your willingness. We have a pretty good idea of you as a character. We choose to walk beside you long before you perhaps are aware that you have any mediumistic qualities whatsoever. So that we're fully cognizant then of the, can I call it, the weak and the strong places in your makeup, but we still cannot intrude upon you unasked. We cannot force ourselves upon you. We can only wait for you to say, I want to do this. But as soon as you say, I want to do that, I really want to serve God and the spirit people, then you are, as it were, dedicated. It is as sacred in that sense as taking vows in a monastery or a convent. The difference being, of course, that we have to walk along with you and wait for your conscious mind to incorporate what is happening on a psychic level. which is so, why it is so important that you do not entertain any doubts as to your psychic ability as such. You can, of course you can, become confused and muddled over which direction that is going to take for you, but that, if you would allow, would take care of itself if you would simply offer yourself to the positive assurance of the partnership that we represent. So, I've shown you, as it were, the finished article in a very brief explanation of it. Now I want to try and explain to you the way it works. As I've explained, the very powerful psychic is the most useful for evidence of survival in the physical sense of the word, so that it creates an utterly, I think, erroneous impression of the medium, in that people say, well, they're not terribly spiritual, they seem to be very earthy. And of course they have to be, because that is the essence of their value, that is their real quality, that is their real strength. They can't talk about Uncle Harry and Uncle Bill. He probably liked to go into a public house, or he probably enjoyed life in all sorts of ways that would be classified far from spiritual. So they have to be accessible then to these denser vibrations of personality. And were they too delicately, aurically tuned, they couldn't do this. So that is the essence of their value. But these people as persons can be highly evolved spirits. If, for instance, again, I like to give analogies, supposing a duchess or somebody who's been brought up with culture, with refinement, with everything that is delicately beautiful, decides that they're going to go and work among the poor, and they go and work in the slums, or they go and work in these industrial places that are so filled with degradation of one kind or another. They have, as it were, to be one of the crowd. They have to be one of the people with whom they work. It wouldn't be any good taking all their refinements, their butlers, their maids, and all the trappings that accompany a cultural way of life into that sort of situation. And this is why the medium who has to give positive material evidence of survival appears sometimes to be a very materially minded person. Frequently, that has nothing to do with reality, because spiritually minded or spiritually progressive means the quality or the motive or the power that you enlist into what you do. The next step, of course, demands this area of expansion. Now, you may start off with hearing this and seeing that on a purely physical level, again, of communication. But that may only be your introduction to usefulness. It may be that as you develop your psychic aptitude and all that that means, your auric expansion now is radiating on a level where we can, on behalf of the people whom you are able to serve, bring in wider aspects of spiritual influence and thought. And again, this provides the kind of power that can help people on what you term a spiritual level, again, not in any pious sense, but lifting it out of the earthly area of activity and experience. You need something to help you to understand that you are really doing the right thing at the right time. You need to have the assurance that you're not making a mistake about believing somebody or disbelieving or whatever. And these areas, again, are very much more subtly delicate than this earthly level. And this could be, again, your next area of progression. You may be a person who receives on behalf of your recipients this kind of spiritual help, spiritual counseling, spiritual directive that is essential to their particular need. And again, this would be cultivated. Now, if you are one such as these, you will find that it's awfully difficult for you to see people in the body, as it were, as they were when they were on the earth plane, or to hear them. You will, of course you will, be able to move to that momentarily if the occasion demanded. But as a level of mediumship, taking in a general sense, you would find that your clairaudience or your clairvoyance tended to be a little less spectacular, a little less, can I say, realistic, once you've moved into this area of spiritual influence. The healer, of course, comes into a different category here, because he is using these levels of power in a different way, unless, of course, he is developing his mediumistic potential to receive positive communication from his helpers on behalf of his patients. If he has to tell somebody that they're eating the wrong food or they're not behaving in the right way physically, he can't know that on the level of his healing power. He can only know that on the level, again, of his clairaudience or his clairvoyance. But in the main, this would come into the same category as propaganda, in that it is concerning itself with the physical level of appreciation. If you're talking to somebody about their illnesses, you're talking to them about their physical body. So quite obviously, he is going to have from his guides the same area of density that the propagandist has to convince the widow or the mother of the continuous life of their dear ones. So the healer then has a varying degree of physical levels of power here, because his main concern is directed towards the physical body. What happens when you are ill? I'm sure you know, but what happens when you are ill is that your spirit is out of alignment. Your spirit in the natural overall well-being and healthy state is in complete harmony with your body. Now, your spirit in this sense is a form of energy. It has no shape in the physical sense that you understand it of formation. It doesn't have arms and legs and a head and so on. It is a form of energy motivating your physical activity. If anything is wrong with that harmonious motivation, it's what we call out of alignment. And it is as if a process or procedure of decay takes place. As soon as you take away a spiritual force in any part of your body, that part of your body will deteriorate in some form or another. The healer has, again, to be harmoniously, aurically compatible to you. And his guides, of course, are just as concerned about that compatibility. They feed his aura so that it matches as nearly as possible the aura of the person to whom the healing power is to be sent. But they do this, and through his auric field, he in turn takes these faster frequencies that enable him, of course, to be a healer. In that sense, a healer is a person who can take to himself these finer energies, faster frequencies, slow them down, rather the way the bird chews the food before it feeds the young. Takes the power into himself, he slows it down, and then he re-releases it onto the level of the auric field of the person who is requiring his help. Of course, this is done a great deal naturally without either healer or recipient knowing that it is done, but that's another story. In specific mediumship, in controlled healing, This is always supervised by guides and helpers who go to great lengths to modify or speed this auric penetration. And they, in turn, therefore, have to be on this astral level of motivation, because it's dealing almost continuously with this physical body. Again, the cause may easily be something that is offending their spirit. You see, your spirit knows precisely where you want to go. Your spirit knows your objective. Your spirit knows why you're here upon the earth plane, and it recognizes the various opportunities of life as a means of obtaining and continuing in that objective. But your conscious mind is purely emotional. It responds to likes and dislikes. It doesn't want that, or it does want that. It has no logic or reasoning power on the spiritual level of understanding. It merely reacts, and in its reaction it will resist any kind of spiritual influence that is in any way causing it discomfort. And if you consider that the whole object of your incarnation, in whatever direction that may take you, is to increase your refinement, and if you can accept that increasing your refinement means breaking down the density, it's very easy to see that this must be constantly in conflict with the physical density which you are breaking down and the spiritual objective. And frequently, this causes tremendous displacement in the way, the discordant way that I tried to explain. Now, that may not necessarily be a physical thing or cause altogether. That may require a greater degree of spiritual energy, not just to put back the displacement, because that's what the overall healing power does. It injects into your auric field a spiritual force that enables you, rather like putting your bone back when it's been out, or your muscle, it puts back into that spirit-physical coordination and harmonizes it. Now, the fact that you may be doing this to yourself in one way or another, of course, is the reason why it's not always permanent. But if by the procedure of the injection of energy you have corrected something, you put something right, then of course the person says, that was wonderful, I haven't had it since I came to you. And this is of course the answer and is highly satisfactory. But if that person is in conflict with themselves in any way, and is constantly at war, as it were, with what the spirit wants to do and what the physical is resisting, they won't know this on a conscious level. They may have no idea of it. But it may well be that here the healer would be, benefited by his guide being able to inject thoughts or ideas to him that he can relay to his patient and perhaps cause a little different way of thought. Now that would require a faster frequency, because now he's talking not to his body but to his spirit. So it would require a faster frequency of power. So you will have the healer again in these classified areas of density on the one hand, marvelous for taking away your backache, marvelous for doing this or doing that, that is a kind of instantaneous cure and everything pertaining to physical discomfort. You have the other that somehow you feel a much more gentle power, and I feel better, says the patient, just talking to you, just knowing that this power is coming to me. Here you are dealing with a finer, faster frequency. So you will see how important it is for you as mediums to accept your variation, to accept this, again, it's a wide generalization, but it is very important to recognize that if you excel in one area, in your ability to reach the needs of people around you, you are not necessarily going to be able to incorporate those, although there is no demarcation line, there is no limit to your mediumistic capacity, but it is of necessity classified in these areas of vibratory energy that is best suited for this purpose or that. Perhaps the most important thing for you to remember is that mediumship itself is entirely negative. The best mediums are the mediums who say, I know my guide is there and I know whatever I need, as long as I use my mediumistic mechanism correctly, I know whatever I need will be forthcoming, and then to the best of their ability get out of the way. Now, quite obviously, we have to use a physical mechanism. We have to use your brain. We have to use your mind. We have to use all the various response on the physical level that you are able to afford us. But if you would give us the, can I say, the supremacy of understanding and listen on the psychic level rather than the physically conscious level, observe on the psychic level rather than the physical level, you would allow yourselves then to be so much more influenced by your guides and your helpers who know precisely the needs of the people who come to you, where you in the body cannot possibly know. You couldn't turn to the person around you and say to them, I know that you want this kind of healing or that. You could feel the person beside you very tired or very depleted or very depressed. Oh yes, you could feel that. But we would know how best to meet that need in a way that you can have no conscious awareness of whatsoever. Because you see, everything has its cause, everything has its origin, everything has its foundation. And it may well be that mediumistically you are meeting the need of some traveler on that pathway who has come a long way along their own spiritual path and is now grappling with something that is quite momentous to them on a spiritual level. You can have no knowledge of this. For you, it's just another person who is either depressed or not sleeping well or something like that. But for us, and for the guides and the guardians responsible to that particular person, it is a very important milestone. It is a time when we can, if only we have the right kind of instrument through whom to work, that we can really say to that person, here is the strength. Now, look, this is the way you have to go. And by whatever means that can be injected, because again it has its interpretation and explanations on all levels of conscious participation. But it could be responsible for changing that person's life at that particular moment that had absolutely nothing to do with the disability, but everything to do with the spiritual influence that your healing power was able to inject. So you see, it is a very wide and very, very varied horizon of activity and spiritual assistance. Just one brief word, because I do want to give you time to ask your questions. One brief word about your guides. Now, it may be that when you first begin your development, you are aware of this guide or that guide, and then that changes. And then the medium will say, you know, I'm seeing somebody else with you now. This could well be, for the reasons I've already explained, that as you progress, so your vibrations are increased by the exercising of your psychic mechanism, and you come into these areas again of different activity from these early beginnings, so that your positive mediumship is taking you this way and that way. And again, briefly, you don't lose those earlier guides, because sometimes you have to retrace your steps a little because somebody needs that lower level, density level, and you are, of course, you have to come down. You will still have this limitation of range, but that will be unaffected by your development in any retrogressive sense. On the contrary, it embraces and incorporates a much wider range. That's what your development does. It enables your guides to stretch your range into these wider areas. Although again, the range itself still being directed towards the physical level, in that development, it is increased in the varying personalities on that level of auric changes. But let us assume that you have come through the density of that onto these finer, faster frequencies, because that is your potential. If and when it is in any way necessary to you, you can always re-adopt your slower range, albeit because that is demanded of you at that particular time. But that would be very definitely subsidiary. It would not be the main area of your mediumistic activity. But you don't lose anything in growth. You simply learn how to go beyond it. And frequently in going beyond it, you eliminate the necessity to have the lower and slower vibrations. Rather like learning to read with picture blocks. Once you read the text, you don't need the picture blocks because you can read. But on the other hand, if pictures or illustrations were a necessary part of the education, you could still lose the text and use the pictures. So you see, there is this freedom of movement, and you can come down, but you can't go up out of your range. You can only come down to a degree again of your own range limitation. But in the main, this incorporates practically every aspect of the astral necessity you would require. Its variety, of course, is increased by the auric personalities of the people whom you are able to serve. Your guides then will change from time to time, not change in that they are no longer there with you, but they are still there. But your development now has enabled you to bring into your conscious level of awareness the presence of this helper or that one, where hitherto your range, because you hadn't developed enough, was, as it were, out of reach of the conscious awareness of those helpers. They are there always, and even though you are not consciously aware of them, they would radiate, they would inject, they would certainly participate in all your activities. So, to sum it all up then, develop and understand your psychic mechanism, what it does, how to use it, how to operate it. Which manifestation of psychic activity does this or does that? What to expect from these levels in a positive and quite convincing and accurate way. Having accomplished that, allow yourself now to be used rather the way you use your telephones. You know that the telephone is in good order. Now, hand it over to the communicator on the one side, the recipient on the other, and know that in that withdrawal of yourself, the real and most powerfully effective service will be rendered, whatever again that service commands from you. You don't have to guess. You don't have to try to understand. You don't have to measure your own usefulness. It's all there if you can only allow us to use your mechanism, to use your cooperation and your loving and sincere desire to serve humanity. And now, Madam Chairman, if I haven't talked too long, I want to hear, I hope, some questions. You are psychic, obviously, B1, because you wouldn't have the experience at all were you not psychic. When a person is naturally psychic, they have what we call a build-up of psychic energy. And on occasions, that something sparks that off for some reason. And fractionally, you are in tune with these sounds momentarily. And then, of course, it's gone. Do you remember I said to you it's very easy to see when somebody is potentially psychic because there are these flashes in their auric field. He would see that because of the auric expansion that your own clairaudience promoted. If you can accept from it that it is a positive assurance of your own psychic ability, Now the onus remains with you to say whether you're going to do something about it or not. And this could be one of these, I call it pressurizing influences, because whilst we have to stand and wait for you, we don't just stand there with folded hands. We keep on injecting thoughts into your consciousness to try to awaken your interest. Yeah? It's got all the hallmarks, dear one, of being hooked.